Share my bed or freeze alone. What the Apache woman told the cowboy changed everything. The snow fell in heavy, swirling sheets, covering the rocky canyon in a thick blanket of white. The cold was biting, sharper than anything the cowboy had felt before. His boots crunched over the frozen ground, each step more difficult than the last. The wind cut through his coat like knives, and the frigid air made every breath painful. He had been traveling for days, delivering supplies to small settlements across the Arizona wilderness. But this winter storm had caught him completely off guard. He had underestimated the speed of the weather, thinking he could reach the next town before nightfall. Now, as darkness approached, he realized he was in serious trouble. His fingers were numb, his lips blue, and his body ached from exhaustion. The cold was relentless, and he knew he could not survive long out here without shelter. His horse had fallen behind hours ago, and he was forced to continue alone. Every rock and tree looked the same in the blizzard, and he felt the growing weight of hopelessness pressing down on him. For the first time in many years, he felt completely powerless. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a faint light flickering through the snow. At first, he thought it might be a trick of his tired mind, but as he stumbled closer, he realized it was coming from a small cabin nestled between two large rock formations. Relief surged through him, but it was mixed with hesitation. He had heard stories about the remote homes of the Apache people known for their strength, independence, and sometimes their fierce protection of their land. Approaching was risky, yet staying outside meant certain death. He had no choice but to hope the occupants were friendly. The cabin door opened before he could even knock. A woman stepped out, her dark hair partially hidden under a simple cloth, her eyes sharp and alert. Despite the storm, she seemed unafraid. She studied him carefully, noticing his frostbitten hands, his trembling frame, and the exhaustion etched into his face. Without a word, she gestured for him to come closer. He hesitated, his pride warring with his instinct for survival. But the cold was unforgiving, and he knew she was offering him the only chance to stay alive. He stepped forward, and she guided him into the warm glow of her cabin. Inside, the smell of burning wood and simple cooking filled the air. The contrast to the bitter cold outside was immediate and overwhelming. He felt a warmth that went beyond the fire. It was the warmth of human kindness and safety, a feeling he hadn't realized he missed so deeply. She handed him a thick blanket and a bowl of hot stew. He ate quickly, though the cold still made his fingers shake. He wanted to thank her, but words caught in his throat. She didn't seem offended by his silence. Instead, she spoke gently, telling him to sit closer to the fire to let the heat reach his frozen limbs. Her voice was calm but firm, and it carried a weight that made him listen without question. As he tried to regain feeling in his hands, she made another suggestion. "You can share my bed if you want," she said. The words struck him like lightning. He froze, unsure how to respond. There was no hidden meaning in her tone, only practicality, an understanding that the human body needed warmth to survive extreme cold. Still, the idea felt foreign to him. He was a man used to facing the world alone, relying only on his own strength. Accepting help in such an intimate way challenged everything he thought he knew about himself. He looked at her, trying to read her expression. She met his gaze without embarrassment or hesitation, her eyes steady and honest. There was no judgment, no expectation beyond survival. It was a simple choice: share warmth and live, or cling to pride and risk freezing. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the snow piled higher against the cabin walls. He realized that survival had nothing to do with pride. Finally, he nodded, his decision made. The tension he had felt slowly melted into gratitude and relief. He followed her to the small sleeping area, carefully arranging himself under the blanket. The fire's warmth seeped into his aching body, and he felt life returning to his frozen fingers and toes. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, to relax, and to trust someone else. As he lay there, he began to notice more about the woman. Her presence was calm and composed, yet there was a strength beneath it that was impossible to ignore. She moved with quiet confidence, taking care of the cabin with practiced ease. Every gesture seemed deliberate, thoughtful, as if every action had a purpose. He realized that her life in this harsh environment had taught her not just survival, but mastery over it. She was independent in a way he had never encountered before, yet generous enough to help a stranger without hesitation. Through the night, he listened to the storm outside, feeling both the danger and the protection that the cabin offered. He thought about his life on the open range, the countless days spent traveling alone, and the walls he had built around himself. He had faced danger before, fought off wild animals, and survived harsh winters, but never had he felt so utterly reliant on another person. The realization was humbling, and in that humility, he found a strange comfort. By morning, the storm had eased slightly, though the landscape remained blanketed in white. He awoke to the woman already tending the fire and preparing a simple breakfast. She did not ask him to do anything. Her care was given freely, without expectation. He watched her, silently admiring the quiet efficiency and the strength behind her gentle movements. Like a romance song, she noticed his gaze and offered a small smile, one that seemed to acknowledge both the danger he had faced and the trust that had been established between them. As they ate together, he felt the beginnings of a connection that went beyond mere survival. There was respect growing, a recognition of each other's courage and resilience. The storm had forced them into an unlikely situation, but within that situation, a bond was forming, one based on trust, mutual need, and the raw reality of the wilderness. Before he left the warmth of the cabin, he looked at her once more. I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice rough from the cold and disuse. She shrugged lightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You survived," she said simply. "That's thanks enough." Her tone carried no arrogance, only practicality and a hint of warmth. The simplicity of her words struck him deeply. In a world full of pretense and pride, her honesty was refreshing, almost shocking. The cowboy stepped outside, the cold hitting him anew. But now it felt different. It was still harsh, still dangerous, but he was no longer alone. He had someone who had seen him at his weakest and still offered care without question. The memory of the warmth, the fire, the blanket, and her steady eyes lingered with him, creating a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. As he mounted his horse and rode slowly through the snow, he realized that the encounter had changed something inside him. It wasn't just about surviving the storm. It was about recognizing the value of connection, trust, and courage. The world outside remained unforgiving, but now he knew that even in the harshest conditions, human kindness could create a sanctuary. He would remember her words forever, the choice she had given him, and the quiet strength she carried. Even as the wind howled and the snow continued to fall, he rode with a renewed sense of purpose. The storm would pass, and the road would be difficult, but he had survived something greater than the cold. He had survived the walls he had built around himself, and in their place, a small light of trust had begun to shine. And somewhere, deep in the canyon, the Apache woman watched from her cabin, knowing she had given him not just shelter, but a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The morning light filtered softly through the small cabin windows, casting long shadows over the wooden floor. The cowboy stirred under the thick blanket, feeling the warmth from the fire and the calm presence of the Apache woman nearby. He blinked against the gentle light, trying to shake off the lingering fatigue and frostbite from the night before. The memory of her words, the offer to share her bed, still lingered, not in an uncomfortable way, but as a reminder of the strange and unexpected kindness that had saved his life. He sat up slowly, stretching his aching limbs. The cabin, though modest, felt surprisingly cozy. The walls were lined with simple tools, baskets and dried herbs hanging from the beams. There was a quiet order to everything, a sense that each item had a purpose and place. The woman moved with ease, tending to the fire and preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge and roasted roots. She hummed softly, a tune that seemed to belong to the mountains and valleys surrounding her home. He watched her for a moment, unsure if he should speak or simply observe. Finally, he cleared his throat. I don't know your name," he said, his voice still rough from the cold. She looked over her shoulder, her dark eyes meeting his with a calm steadiness. "Names matter, but they can wait," she said with a small smile. "For now you are just a guest who survived the storm." Her words had a simplicity to them, yet they carried meaning. He nodded, accepting the moment, and reached for a bowl of porridge. The warmth of the food revived him slowly, easing the numbness that had lingered through the night. As he ate, he noticed the way she moved around the cabin with quiet purpose. Every action, from stirring the fire to arranging the blankets, seemed deliberate, yet effortless. There was a rhythm to her life that he had never encountered in his own, a life dictated by necessity and strengthened by skill. After breakfast, the woman handed him a hat and a pair of gloves. "You need to keep warm if you are going outside," she said. Her tone was gentle, but there was an edge of authority in it, a quiet reminder that life in the wilderness demanded respect and preparation. The cowboy accepted the items, realizing how unprepared he had been before the storm. He felt a twinge of humility, acknowledging silently that he had underestimated both the environment and the strength of the woman who had saved him. They spent the morning together doing chores around the cabin. He chopped wood under her watchful eye, learning the proper technique to avoid injury. She showed him how to check the small traps she had set outside for rabbits and squirrels, explaining how each trap was positioned for efficiency and minimal waste. The cowboy listened carefully, absorbing her instructions and marveling at her knowledge of the land. Every step revealed a life lived in close harmony with nature, a life shaped by survival and respect rather than convenience or comfort. As they worked, conversation began to flow more naturally. The cowboy shared stories of his travels, of long days on horseback, of ranches and small towns he had visited. He spoke cautiously at first, unsure how much to reveal to a stranger, but her attentive listening encouraged him. She asked questions, not to pry, but to understand. In return, she shared stories of her own life, of the challenges she had faced living alone in the wilderness, of lessons learned from her parents and elders. There was no judgment in her words, only clarity and honesty. By midday, the snowstorm had lessened, and the world outside seemed almost peaceful in contrast to the previous night's chaos. They stood together at the edge of the cabin, surveying the snow-covered landscape. The cowboy felt a sense of awe, not just at the beauty around him, but at the quiet strength of the woman beside him. She had faced hardships he could only imagine, yet she met each day with resilience and courage. There was a calm confidence in her that drew him in, making him feel both respect and curiosity. Lunch was simple, consisting of bread and dried meat, yet it was shared with a sense of camaraderie that made it feel like more. They laughed at small things, spilled crumbs, a clumsy movement, a shared joke about the stubborn snow outside. For the first time in days, the cowboy felt a sense of ease, a release from the constant tension of survival. The cabin, the fire, and the presence of another person had created a sanctuary, a brief respite from the dangers of the outside world. As the afternoon progressed, the woman led him to a small area near the edge of her property. She showed him how she gathered firewood efficiently, how she could read animal tracks in the snow, and how she prepared simple remedies from herbs and roots. The cowboy marveled at her knowledge. It was not taught in schools or learned in towns. It was lived, earned through years of experience and observation. He felt a growing respect, realizing that survival was about more than strength or skill alone. It was about understanding, patience, and the ability to adapt. In the quiet moments, they shared personal reflections. The cowboy admitted for the first time to anyone how lonely life on the trail could be, how he often felt disconnected from people and places. The woman listened without interruption, her eyes never leaving his face. When she spoke, her words were measured and thoughtful, offering insight without preaching. "Loneliness can teach you about yourself," she said softly. "But it is also a warning to seek connection when you can find it." Her words struck him deeply. He had always believed that solitude was his strength, that relying on no one was the way to survive the harsh realities of life. But now he began to see another truth, that survival could be shared, that trust and cooperation were as vital as skill and endurance. He realized that his encounter with her was more than a chance meeting. It was a lesson, a test of his ability to open himself to someone else. As evening approached, the temperature dropped once more. The wind carried a bitter chill, reminding him of the night before. This time, however, he did not fear it in the same way. He knew that the cabin would offer warmth, but more importantly, he had found a companion in the woman. There was no romantic pretense yet, only a growing bond of trust, respect, and shared experience. He felt an unfamiliar comfort in her presence, a sense of being understood without the need for words. Dinner was quiet, simple, and nourishing. They ate slowly, savoring the warmth and the respite from the harsh world outside. The woman moved efficiently, cleaning up after the meal and preparing the fire for the night. The cowboy watched, noticing the care and discipline she applied to even the smallest tasks. He realized that her strength was not only in her survival skills, but also in her ability to create order and stability in a world that could be chaotic and dangerous. As the night settled in, the cowboy felt a shift within himself. The fear and exhaustion of the storm were replaced by a sense of gratitude and reflection. He understood that his life would never be quite the same after this experience. The woman had challenged his pride, offered him protection, and shown him a form of strength that was different from his own. He began to respect her not just as a caretaker, but as a person with her own history, her own resilience, and her own values. When it was time to sleep, they sat by the fire, sharing stories of the land and its seasons. The cowboy learned about the traditions of the Apache people, their connection to nature, and the wisdom passed down through generations. He felt a deep sense of humility, realizing how little he truly knew about the world beyond his travels and his own experiences. In turn, she listened to his tales with interest, asking questions that revealed her curiosity and her openness to understanding the life of someone so different from herself. Before they settled for the night, she spoke once more about the importance of warmth and survival. "The storm has passed for now," she said softly, "but the lessons it leaves behind are yours to remember." He nodded, understanding that this was more than advice. It was a reflection on trust, resilience, and the unexpected ways people could connect in times of need. As he lay down, the cowboy felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and admiration. The bond forming between them was subtle, but undeniable. It was built on mutual respect, shared experience, and the acknowledgement of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. The storm had forced them together, but their growing connection was something deeper, something neither could have anticipated when the snow first began to fall. Outside, the wind moaned through the canyon, rattling the cabin walls and reminding him of the harsh world beyond. Yet inside, there was warmth, safety, and a sense of companionship that he had never known. He realized that this encounter was changing him, opening a part of himself that he had long kept hidden. He had survived the storm physically, but he was also surviving emotionally, learning lessons in trust, connection, and the quiet power of human kindness. As sleep finally claimed him, the cowboy understood that the night's events were only the beginning. The blizzard had introduced him to someone extraordinary, someone who would challenge him, guide him, and perhaps, in time, become a part of his life in ways he could not yet imagine. And somewhere, watching over him with quiet vigilance, the Apache woman knew that the storm had revealed more than the harshness of winter. It had revealed the beginnings of a bond that might endure far beyond the coldest nights. The snow had melted slightly, leaving patches of white clinging to the canyon rocks, while the air remained crisp and biting. The cowboy and the Apache woman spent the morning checking on the small traps and livestock she had outside her cabin. The chores were simple but necessary. The cowboy had grown accustomed to her rhythm, following her instructions and learning from her every movement. It was clear that survival in this land required more than strength. It required patience, knowledge, and respect for every living thing. The quiet routine, however, was disrupted in the early afternoon when the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. The cowboy's heart jumped, and he turned to see a man on horseback approaching rapidly. The man was a rancher from a nearby settlement, known to the cowboy from his travels. He was looking for him, insisting that he return immediately to the town for business. The sudden arrival was jarring, and the cowboy felt a surge of anxiety. He was safe in the cabin, but outside, he faced both the cold and a demand that threatened the fragile trust he had begun to build with the Apache woman. The woman noticed his unease immediately. She studied the approaching figure with sharp eyes, her posture alert. "You have choices," she said quietly. "You can leave, but it will be cold, and there are dangers beyond these rocks. Or you can stay, but you will have to face the world in your own way when it is time." Her words were calm but firm, a reminder that the wilderness was not forgiving. The cowboy nodded, understanding that the decision was his to make, and that it would define not only his survival, but the connection he had begun to form with her. As the rancher drew closer, the cowboy mounted his horse, his mind racing. He wanted to obey the call of duty, to return to familiar routines and responsibilities. Yet, there was a hesitation he could not ignore, a feeling that had grown steadily since the night of the blizzard. The warmth of the cabin, the quiet strength of the woman, and the safety she provided had revealed a part of himself he had long ignored, the part that craved trust, companionship, and understanding. He rode back briefly to meet the rancher, explaining politely that he could not leave immediately. The rancher, sensing his reluctance, gave him a warning look, but ultimately accepted the explanation. "Don't overstay your welcome," he said gruffly, and then rode off into the distance. The cowboy exhaled, realizing the tension had been temporary, yet it had reminded him of the world he was leaving behind. Returning to the cabin, he found the woman waiting at the doorway, her expression calm but knowing. "The world will always call for your attention," she said softly. "It is your choice whether you answer immediately or take the time to understand yourself first." Her words lingered in his mind. He realized that the encounter with the rancher was more than a disruption. It was a reflection of the life he had been living, always rushing, always isolated, always avoiding connection. The afternoon passed with them working side by side, repairing small fences and clearing paths around the cabin. The cowboy marveled at her efficiency and focus, noting how every action was deliberate, with no wasted movement. She taught him to look at the land differently, not just as a place to survive, but as a space to understand, respect, and live in harmony with. He learned to notice the tracks in the snow, the way the wind shaped the trees, and how small changes in the environment could signal opportunities or dangers. As they paused for a brief rest, sitting on a log beside the cabin, the cowboy felt the growing weight of reflection. "I've spent so many years on my own," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I thought it made me strong. But I think I've been wrong." The woman regarded him silently, her eyes kind but piercing. "Strength is not just about standing alone," she said gently. "It is also about knowing when to rely on someone else, when to trust, and when to share your life with others." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He had always measured his worth by his ability to face hardships alone, to endure the cold, the loneliness, and the dangers without help. But now he began to see that there was another kind of strength, one that involved courage, yes, but also trust, understanding, and the willingness to be vulnerable. He realized that the lessons of the blizzard had only begun, and that the real challenge lay not in surviving the cold, but in navigating his own emotions and choices. By evening, the wind had picked up again, signaling another storm was approaching. They prepared the cabin together, stacking firewood and securing windows against the gusts. The cowboy noticed the care she took in every detail, from ensuring the fire would last through the night to arranging blankets and tools within easy reach. Her foresight impressed him, but more than that, it revealed a life lived with mindfulness, where every action had meaning. Dinner was a quiet affair. They ate by the fire, sharing simple bread, roasted vegetables, and dried meat. Conversation flowed naturally, moving from practical matters to stories of their pasts. He spoke of the trails he had ridden, the people he had met, and the challenges he had faced alone. She shared tales of her family, of lessons learned in the wilderness, and of moments when survival had required more than physical strength. It had required courage, ingenuity, and heart. After the meal, they sat in companionable silence, listening to the wind as it rattled the cabin walls. The cowboy felt the beginnings of a deep respect and affection, though he did not yet fully understand it. The woman's presence had become a steadying. The sun rose slowly over the canyon, painting the snow-covered rocks with golden light. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside crisp, quiet, and sparkling. The cowboy stepped outside the cabin, breathing in the sharp, clean air. His horse pawed at the snow nearby, eager to move, but he did not rush. Something inside him had changed. The night's quiet reflection had given him a clarity he had not felt in years. The world outside was harsh, yes, but there was also a sense of possibility, a sense of life renewed after the storm. He turned to the Apache woman who was already outside, tending to the small garden she had managed to maintain even through the snow. She noticed him watching and gave a small, knowing smile. It was the same calm, steady smile he had seen since the first day he arrived, but now it carried something different. A quiet confidence that came from shared experience, from trust, and perhaps even understanding. For the first time, the cowboy understood the choice before him. He could return to the life he had always known, traveling alone, facing the world in isolation, and clinging to pride and routine. Or he could stay, embracing the unknown, accepting vulnerability, and sharing his life with someone who had shown him what courage, trust, and connection truly meant. The thought of leaving now, after everything he had experienced with her, felt almost unbearable. They worked together in companionable silence, preparing the cabin and the surrounding area for the day. He chopped wood, carrying logs to the fire, while she checked the traps and livestock. Every movement between them was quiet but full of meaning. Words were not always necessary. They had learned to communicate through gestures, glances, and shared understanding. The trust that had begun in the blizzard was now deeper, unspoken, and yet undeniable. Over breakfast, they shared stories of their families and their pasts. The cowboy spoke of his parents, of the ranch he had grown up on, and the lessons he had learned about hard work and endurance. She listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest. In return, she shared stories of her childhood, of lessons learned in the wilderness, and of the strength she had gained from surviving hardships alone. The conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time the cowboy felt truly seen, not as a rugged traveler, but as a man capable of care, reflection, and trust. By midday, the sun had climbed higher, warming the snow and melting patches of ice. The cowboy knew that soon he would have to make his decision. He could sense the pull of his old life, the familiarity of the trails, towns, and routine. But he also felt the pull of something new, something that had grown quietly over the past days. A connection with someone who understood strength, courage, and compassion in ways he had never known. The woman noticed his thoughtful gaze as he looked out over the canyon. "You are thinking about leaving," she said gently. There was no accusation in her voice, only calm observation. "And you must decide, not for me, but for yourself. Every choice you make shapes your path." Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. He understood that she was not trying to persuade him with emotion or expectation. She was giving him the freedom to choose, while also reminding him of the responsibility that came with every choice. He swallowed hard, realizing that this was the moment he had been preparing for without knowing it. All the lessons of the past days, the trust, the shared survival, the quiet companionship, had led to this point. He thought of the blizzard, of her offer to share her bed, of the warmth and care she had shown him when he had been at his weakest. He thought of the quiet moments by the fire, the shared work, the laughter, and the deep conversations. Each memory carried a weight of truth and understanding that he could not ignore. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I don't want to go back to being alone," he said. "I've spent so many years thinking that I needed to handle everything by myself, but I see now I was wrong. I want to stay. I want to learn. I want to be part of this. With you." The woman's eyes softened and a small smile curved her lips. She did not respond with words of praise or relief. Instead, she simply nodded, acknowledging the courage it had taken for him to speak honestly. In that moment, the bond between them shifted from survival and respect to something deeper: trust, understanding, and the beginnings of true partnership. They spent the rest of the day together, preparing for the weeks ahead. They repaired fences, gathered firewood, and checked the small garden and traps. The cowboy noticed how natural it felt to work alongside her, to follow her guidance while also contributing his own strength and skill. He felt a sense of belonging he had never known before, a belonging not defined by ownership or control, but by shared effort, respect, and care. As evening fell, they sat outside the cabin, watching the sun sink behind the snow-covered rocks. The sky was painted in shades of gold and orange, reflecting off the snow and casting long shadows across the canyon. The cowboy felt a quiet peace settle over him. The world outside was still harsh, but within this small cabin and the presence of the woman, he had found warmth, safety, and understanding. He thought back to the night of the blizzard, when he had first arrived, cold, exhausted, and unsure of what the next hours would bring. That night had been a turning point, not just in terms of survival, but in terms of the life he had been living. He realized that survival was not only about enduring storms or navigating dangers, It was also about connection, trust, and the courage to embrace change. The woman spoke softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "The canyon has tested you," she said, "but it has also given you the chance to see yourself in a new way. You have learned that strength is not only in standing alone, but in standing with someone you trust." Her words were gentle, yet they carried the weight of truth. The cowboy nodded, understanding fully what she meant. He had faced the storm, faced his own pride, and chosen a new path, a path that included her and the bond they had built together. Night fell, and the fire burned brightly inside the cabin. They sat together, tending to it, sharing small stories and reflecting on the days that had passed. The cowboy felt a deep gratitude, not only for her guidance and care, but for the lessons she had imparted about life, trust, and courage. He knew that the path ahead would not always be easy, but he also knew that with her by his side, he could face whatever challenges came their way. When it was finally time to sleep, they arranged the blankets and sat quietly by the fire for a few moments, watching the flames dance. The cowboy felt a sense of completion, of closure for the fear and uncertainty he had carried into the canyon. He had survived the blizzard, yes, but he had also survived his own doubts, pride, and hesitation. The lessons of the past days had shaped him, opening him to connection, understanding, and the possibility of shared life. As he lay down beside the woman, he felt a quiet contentment. The fire's warmth and the security of the cabin were comforting, but the deeper warmth came from trust, respect, and the bond they had nurtured together. He realized that life would always bring storms, both literal and metaphorical, but that facing them with someone you respect and trust made all the difference. The woman watched him settle in, her eyes reflecting the firelight. She had faced many challenges alone in her life, but she recognized the courage it took for him to open himself to change, to trust, and to choose connection over isolation. She had offered guidance, warmth, and understanding, but it was his choice to accept it, and in doing so, he had proven his strength in a new and meaningful way. As sleep overtook them both, the cowboy felt a quiet hope he had not known in years. The canyon outside was still wild and unforgiving, but inside the cabin he had found something stronger than survival alone. He had found connection, trust, and the beginnings of a partnership built on respect, understanding, and shared experience. The lessons of the storm, the blizzard, and the quiet days that followed had transformed him. He was no longer just a man who survived alone. He was a man who had learned to trust, to care, and to share life with someone extraordinary. And somewhere in the quiet night, the Apache woman felt a sense of satisfaction. She had given him shelter, warmth, and guidance. But more than that, she had given him a chance to see a new way of life. She knew that the bond they had formed would shape not only his path, but hers as well. The canyon, with all its challenges and beauty, had created something rare, a connection that would endure beyond storms, beyond fear, and beyond the harshness of the wilderness. Morning would come again, and the world outside would continue to test them. But for now, within the cabin, by the fire, they slept with a sense of peace, trust, and understanding that was stronger than the coldest winter, deeper than the widest canyon, and brighter than any sunrise. They had faced the storms together, both external and internal, and had emerged changed, not just as individuals, but as two people whose lives were now intertwined in the most meaningful way possible. Force in his life, offering guidance, care, and an example of strength he had never encountered before. He realized that he had begun to depend on her, not in weakness, but in trust, a trust he had rarely allowed himself to feel. The approaching storm became a backdrop for reflection. The cowboy understood that his life outside the canyon had been defined by routine, pride, and isolation. Now he was faced with a choice: return to that familiar solitude, or embrace the uncertainty of connection, even if it meant risking disappointment or loss. The lessons of the past days had revealed a truth he could not ignore. Human connection, trust, and shared experience were as vital to survival as skill, strength, and courage. As night fell, the cabin glowed with the warmth of the fire. The cowboy and the Apache woman worked together to prepare for the long hours ahead. They secured the doors, added extra firewood, and arranged blankets to keep the cold at bay. The quiet cooperation between them was comforting, a silent acknowledgement of trust and respect. In these moments, words were not always necessary. Each gesture, each glance, and each shared task reinforced the bond that had grown steadily since the night of the blizzard. Before settling for the night, the woman spoke softly, her voice carrying the calm authority of experience. "The storm outside is a reminder," she said. "Life will always bring challenges, some expected, some sudden. How you face them, and who you choose to trust along the way, defines more than survival. It defines who you are." The cowboy listened carefully, understanding the depth of her words. He realized that the choices he had made in the past, choices made out of pride, fear, or habit, had kept him from experiencing the strength of trust and connection. They shared the fire for warmth once more, sitting quietly as the wind howled outside. The cowboy felt a growing sense of clarity, a realization that his bond with the woman was more than a convenience. It was a connection built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared experience. He began to see her not just as a guide or protector, but as a person with her own history, strength, and wisdom. The thought was both humbling and inspiring. As the night deepened, the cowboy reflected on the lessons he had learned over the past few days. He had faced the harshest cold, confronted his own pride, and begun to trust another person in a way he had never allowed himself to before. The Apache woman had shown him that strength was not measured by isolation or endurance alone, but by the courage to be open, to share, and to respect the wisdom of others. He understood that the path ahead would require more than survival skills. It would require patience, trust, and emotional courage. Finally, as they prepared to sleep, the cowboy felt a sense of peace he had not known for years. The storm outside was a reminder of the harsh world beyond the cabin, but inside he had found warmth, understanding, and a connection that was slowly reshaping his life. He realized that his journey with the woman was far from over, but that the choices he made now would shape not only his survival, but the depth of the bond forming between them. And as he drifted to sleep, he understood that the real storm, the challenge of opening his heart, trusting another person, and facing life beyond the familiar, had only just begun. The lessons of survival were no longer only about the cold, snow, and wilderness. They were about connection, trust, and the courage to change. And in the quiet of the cabin, with the wind outside and the fire before them, the cowboy felt the first true stirrings of something he had long forgotten: hope.